The morning light slipped softly through the half-open curtains, drawing pale golden lines across the wooden floor. Daniel Rivers stood in the kitchen, stirring a cup of coffee he didn't really want. It was a habit more than a need, something to do with his hands when his thoughts threatened to swallow him. He glanced at the clock. 7:42. Emily should have been downstairs by now. She was always up early. Always. Except lately. Lately, nothing was as it always had been. Their marriage had once felt like a warm, steady fire, something that filled the home with comfort, a flame neither of them had to tend constantly to keep alive. It simply was. They had been together for 8 years, married for 5, and their life on the surface looked enviably stable. A cozy suburban house, 2 careers on the rise, weekend getaway trips, dinner with friends where everyone commented on how perfect they seemed. Perfect. Daniel let the word echo in his mind like an empty bell. Emily came downstairs 20 minutes later, her steps slow, almost careful. She used to come down humming. She used to wrap her arms around him from behind, press her face to his back, kiss the space between his shoulders. This morning, she barely nodded. "Morning," she said, her voice neutral, clipped, as if reading from a script she was no longer invested in performing. "Morning," Daniel replied, masking the sting with a small smile. She didn't look at him long enough to notice. She grabbed a mug, poured herself coffee, and immediately reached for her phone. The screen lit up, and with it, a faint but unmistakable smile touched her lips, quick, almost invisible, but enough to twist something deep inside him. Once that smile had been his. "You've been waking up later these days," Daniel said casually, trying to sound light, unbothered. Emily shrugged, "Just tired. Tired from work. Tired from everything, I guess." She took a sip of her coffee, eyes already drifting back to the glowing screen. "You know how it is." But he didn't, not with her. She put her phone face down only when she caught him glancing at it. A defensive gesture, a small one, but a new one. And Daniel noticed everything now. The first real sign had come 3 months earlier. It was evening. Rain tapped the windows, turning the outside world into a blurred watercolor. Daniel was in the living room reviewing a proposal for the upcoming corporate restructuring, his chance at a promotion he'd been working toward for years. Emily sat across the room, curled up in the armchair with her laptop. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys, her expression soft and almost shy. He had watched her for a moment, warmth rising in his chest at the sight. She looked beautiful, illuminated by the screen's glow, her hair falling in loose waves around her face. Then her shoulders lifted slightly in a gesture he knew too well, a small laugh, silent but unmistakable. "Something funny?" he'd asked, smiling. She jumped a little, startled, snapping the laptop partially shut. "No, nothing." Her voice had been too quick, too defensive. That was the first time something inside him whispered that something was wrong. Now, weeks later, the small signs accumulated like dust. A late meeting that didn't match the company calendar. A weekend girls' night out she didn't talk about afterward. The way she put her phone face down more frequently. The way she flinched, barely but perceptibly, when he came up behind her. Daniel tried to shake it off, tried to be rational. Emily had been stressed at work. Her mother's health had been declining. Her own insecurities sometimes made her retreat into herself. They'd been through rough patches before, like any couple. It didn't have to mean. But the mind has a cruel way of turning suspicion into shadow, and shadows into truths. The breaking point came on an ordinary Thursday. Daniel had gotten home earlier than usual. His big presentation had gone well, better than well, judging by the congratulatory handshake from the regional director. He wanted to share the moment with Emily, to celebrate even a little. When he stepped inside the house, he heard her voice drifting from the living room. Soft, low, warmer than it had been with him in weeks. He froze. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. A tone reserved for closeness, intimacy, connection. He moved quietly until he could see her but remained unseen. Emily sat on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, her legs tucked under her. She was smiling, that soft, shy smile he had seen weeks ago. "Yes, I miss you too," she whispered. The world inside Daniel fell silent. The rain tapping against the window, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the ticking of the old wall clock, everything dimmed to nothing but the sound of her voice. "I'll see you tomorrow, same place." A pause, then a small laugh. "Of course I want to." When she hung up, she leaned back into the couch cushions, eyes closed for a moment, her expression peaceful. "Content." He stepped back quietly, leaning against the hallway wall, needing its solidity to stay upright. There it was. The truth. Not an accusation, not a confession. Just reality. And strangely, no explosion followed. No shouting. No demands. No heart-rending confrontation. Instead, something in him closed softly, like a book gently shut after the final page. He walked into the kitchen, made just enough noise opening a cabinet to announce his presence. "Hey," Emily said, appearing a moment later. Her smile vanished when she saw him, replaced by something careful, guarded. "Didn't know you were home." "Just got in," he replied evenly. She studied him for a moment, too long, too suspiciously, before quickly averting her eyes. "Long day?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said, "long day." And that was that. He didn't ask. She didn't tell. And a chasm opened quietly between them. That night Daniel lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing. It was steady, peaceful. She didn't stir, didn't turn toward him the way she used to. She slept as if nothing weighed on her conscience, or perhaps as if the lie had already become truth in her own mind. Daniel looked at the ceiling, his chest heavy with something beyond pain. Betrayal wasn't a sharp knife, it was a sinking stone, heavy, cold, pulling everything inward. But beneath the hurt, beneath the choking quiet inside him, something else took root, something steady, controlled. Resolve. He would not scream. He would not beg. He would not demand explanations or chase answers already clear. He would not become small in the shadow of her choices. No. He would rise. Not to crush her, not to punish her, but to reclaim himself, to step into a version of life she could no longer diminish. And in doing so, he would let her witness, fully and painfully, the truth she had crafted with her deception. She had thrown away something extraordinary. The next morning, he rose early. Showered, dressed, and left for work before Emily even stirred. His movements were calm, precise, controlled. At the office, he walked into the regional director's office and asked for a moment of his time. The director smiled, still impressed by the presentation from the day before, and invited him to sit. Daniel was promoted within 2 weeks. And that was only the beginning. He started spending more time at the gym after work, rediscovering a body he had long taken for granted. He reconnected with old friends, accepted networking invitations, began attending professional seminars he once dismissed as wasting weekends. He found himself laughing more, sleeping better, ironically, only once he stopped sleeping beside Emily. He moved into the guest room one night without explanation. Emily noticed, of course, but she didn't ask why, or she didn't dare. She wasn't ready for the truth she had created. Not yet. But she would be. And deep down she felt it. Felt him slipping away. Felt the distance echo like a cold draft through the house. She watched him dress better, smile more, answer texts from colleagues and friends she had never heard of. She watched him return home later, composed yet unreachable, carrying an air of quiet confidence she had not seen in him for years. And it unnerved her. Her anxiety crept in slowly, wrapping itself around her like a tightening vine. She couldn't name it, not out loud, but it lived in her eyes whenever she looked at him for too long. The irony. She had broken the marriage, but he was the one walking away from its ashes with light in his eyes. Daniel did not gloat. He did not act out of spite. Everything he did for himself. And that was precisely what made his transformation, his quiet, elegant rise, so powerful. Because Emily began to realize the truth. She had not simply betrayed him. She had underestimated him. Deeply, fatally. And her reckoning had only just begun. The weeks that followed unfolded with an almost cinematic clarity for Daniel, each day sharpening the contrast between who he had been and who he was becoming. It wasn't a transformation fueled by anger, nor an attempt to perform strength for an audience. No, his rise was quiet, deliberate, a rebuilding that came from a deep place inside him, a place Emily had never bothered to explore. And because she'd never understood that part of him, she was now terrified by it. It began subtly. Emily would come home from work and expect the familiar routines. Dinner together, casual conversation, the comfortable rhythm they had built over years. But instead, she would find the house quiet, lights dim, the faint sound of the treadmill humming in the basement. When he finished his workout and finally came upstairs, he wasn't breathless or tired. He was calm, centered, almost glowing with a new kind of self-possession. She tried to hide her confusion. "Working out again?" she asked one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Yeah," he replied, wiping his forehead with a towel. "Feels good." "You've been doing it a lot lately." He nodded, needed the change. Emily watched him as he opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. His shoulders looked broader than before, his posture straighter. Even his voice carried a steadiness that unsettled her. He didn't look like the man who went to bed beside her months ago, the man who would drop everything just to make her feel seen. He was someone else now, someone she no longer had access to. The next shift came at work. Daniel's promotion was officially announced on a Monday morning, accompanied by a congratulatory email sent to the entire department. Emily saw it only because he had left the laptop open on the dining table after printing something. She froze, reading the subject line twice to make sure she understood it correctly. "Congratulations to Daniel Rivers, new Senior Operations Director." Her breath hitched. Senior, Director. She blinked, stunned, scrolling down through the message that praised his leadership, creativity, and ability to bring strategic clarity to complex systems. He had talked about a possible promotion months ago, in the days when things were still warm between them. She had nodded then, half listening, assuming it was a long shot. She remembered brushing it off casually, telling him, "If it happens, it happens." But it had happened. Without her knowing, without her support, without her presence in the moment. He hadn't mentioned it at all. Not a word. Not even after the official announcement. Instead, he came home that evening carrying a small bag from a high-end menswear store, and a smoother confidence in the lines of his face. Emily stood in the living room, gripping her phone a little too tightly. "Anything interesting happened today?" she asked, trying to sound light. Daniel set the bag by the wall, took off his jacket, and hung it neatly on the hook. "Yeah," he said, "a few things." She waited. He didn't elaborate. Jealousy and panic swirled in her stomach like a cold storm. 2 days later, she tried again. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "I saw that email from your office." He looked up from the counter, where he was sorting through some documents. "What email?" The promotion announcement." "Oh," he said, as if it were nothing more than a weather report. "Yeah." "You didn't tell me." "You didn't ask." Emily's throat tightened. "But that's a big deal, Daniel. A senior director position, that's huge." He shrugged. "It is." Silence filled the kitchen, thick, tense. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked quietly. He met her eyes then, not coldly, not angrily, but with a kind of indifference that stung far worse. I figured you had other things on your mind. The words weren't sharp, but they were precise, like a needle slipping effortlessly under the skin. Emily's breath hitched and she looked away. Her phone vibrated on the table. She didn't pick it up. Not this time. For the first time since her affair began, she didn't feel excitement or warmth when she saw the name on the screen. She felt dread. The unraveling continued slowly. She began noticing Daniel's absence in places where he once was constant. He skipped their Friday takeout night. Instead of watching shows together in the evening, he retreated to the guest room or went out for hours without explanation. He dressed differently, sharper, with deliberate choices rather than practicality. He started wearing a cologne she didn't recognize, something woody and dark that lingered in the hallway long after he left. One Saturday morning, she walked into the kitchen to find him reading a book with a sleek black cover. "The Psychology of High-Value Decision-Making," she read aloud. "Since when do you read this kind of stuff?" He turned a page slowly. "Since always, I just didn't have time before." "You always had time," she said softly. Daniel looked at her then, a calm, almost curious expression on his face. "No," he corrected, "I always made time." She swallowed, her cheeks warming at the implication. Made time for what? For her. For their life. For a future she had carelessly cracked in two. She bit her lip and stepped back, suddenly needing the coolness of distance to steady herself. What truly unsettled Emily was that Daniel didn't show an ounce of hostility. No accusations, no passive-aggressive remarks, no dramatic withdrawal. He was simply done. Not loudly, not violently, but completely. It was as if he were slowly rediscovering space around him, space he hadn't realized he'd lost, space she had taken for granted. And Emily, for the first time, began to feel the terrifying truth. Daniel wasn't punishing her. He was outgrowing her. Her affair began losing its shine. She found herself ignoring calls, making excuses, feeling uneasy whenever the other man asked why she seemed distant. She no longer smiled at her phone. She no longer felt that flutter of excitement. Instead, she found herself thinking about Daniel's expression when he walked into a room, focused, calm, quietly determined. She noticed the new definition in his shoulders, the purposeful way he moved, the quiet confidence in his voice when he discussed his plans. Plans she was no longer part of. That realization hit harder than anything. One evening, after he returned from a dinner with some executives, she approached him cautiously. "How was your night?" she asked, trying to sound warm. "It was productive," he replied, sliding off his coat. "Who did you go with?" "People from work." "Anyone I know?" "No." "But was it fun?" Daniel paused mid-motion, looking at her with a subtle, unreadable expression. "It was important," he said. "Fun wasn't the point." Emily's breath faltered. She was losing him, not through anger but through irrelevance. The breaking point for her came unexpectedly. It was a Saturday afternoon. Daniel was out and the house felt too large, too quiet. Emily wandered into the guest room he had claimed as his own. She knew she shouldn't. She hesitated at the door, guilt pricking at her spine, but curiosity and something darker won out. Inside, the room was impeccably organized. The bed made neatly, the desk arranged with a new laptop, a planner, a couple of books, and a stack of documents clipped in a sleek folder. Her eyes landed on the planner. Its pages were filled with lists of goals, physical, financial, personal, social, detailed steps, deadlines, progress tracked weekly, notes written in neat handwriting that somehow felt different now, stronger, bolder. She flipped a few more pages and froze. There was a line written in the middle of one page. "Stability first, decisions later." Emily stared at the words. She read them again and again. They weren't a threat. They weren't a plan. They were a boundary. A clear, honest line drawn by a man who had finally regained control. She closed the planner with shaking hands, her heart pounding. When Daniel returned home later, she stood in the hallway waiting for him. "Daniel," she said softly, "can we talk?" He stopped, meeting her gaze with polite patience. "What about?" I feel like things are changing between us." "They are," he said simply. "And you're okay with that?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I'm accepting it." Emily felt something inside her break, quietly, like a hairline crack spreading across glass. "I don't want to lose what we had," she whispered. Daniel held her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "You lost it when you walked away from it." Her breath caught, her eyes stung. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't accusing. He was simply telling the truth. And it was devastating. From that moment on, Emily lived in a state of constant unease. She tried to bring back the warmth, cooking his favorite meals, asking about his day, suggesting movie nights or walks. But Daniel accepted her gestures with polite distance, as if she were nothing more than a familiar acquaintance. He wasn't cruel. Cruelty would have given her something to fight against. He was kind but unreachable. And that was worse. The man she had betrayed was rising, higher, brighter, stronger, while she remained stuck in the consequences of her choices. And for the first time, she understood the nature of his revenge. It wasn't about hurting her. It was about outgrowing her so completely that she would be forced to witness it. And she would. That was only the beginning. Emily had never been a woman easily shaken. Throughout her life, she had prided herself on composure, on control, the quiet assurance that whatever storm came her way, she would be the one holding the umbrella. It was part of her charm, part of what drew people to her. That calm elegance, that subtle confidence, that sense that she always knew what she was doing. But now the storm was inside her. And there was no umbrella. It started with the smallest things. A cup left in the sink, where Daniel used to wash it immediately after finishing his coffee. A shirt he didn't bother hanging up in the hallway. The faint echo of his laughter coming from the guest room as he spoke to colleagues or friends on Zoom. Laughter she hadn't heard directed at her in months. He seemed different, lighter, as if he'd taken off a weight she didn't even know he'd been carrying. And Emily hated that it wasn't her who made him feel that way. It was absence. Her absence. Her betrayal. One Wednesday evening, Daniel came home later than usual. He didn't look tired, though. If anything, he looked energized. His cheeks were slightly flushed from the cold outside, his coat draped casually over his arm, his eyes bright. Emily stood in the living room, pretending to scroll through a magazine, but her gaze flicked up the moment she heard the door. "You're late," she said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," Daniel replied, hanging his coat neatly. "Had a meeting. With work. And some people from the leadership summit." She blinked. "You're going to a summit?" He nodded. "They invited me last week." "But you didn't tell me. You didn't ask." The words hit her like a slap, gentle but devastating in their precision. "How long will you be gone?" she asked quietly. "A week. A whole week." "Yes." She stared at him, her pulse quickening. "Where is it?" "Boston. With colleagues. With people who want to work together." Emily swallowed. It wasn't an answer, at least not the kind she wanted. It was neutral, professional, detached. Everything she was no longer to him. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "I hope it goes well." Daniel nodded politely. "Thank you." Then he walked past her, heading toward the guest room, leaving behind the faint scent of his new cologne, leaving her drowning in silence. Over the next few days, Emily found herself spiraling in ways she never expected. Jealousy was a stranger to her, an emotion she once considered beneath her maturity. She'd always been the one pursued, admired, desired. She had never before been the insecure one, waiting for scraps of attention. But now she watched Daniel like someone afraid of shadows. When he left for work, she stared too long at his retreating figure. When he checked his phone, she found herself analyzing his expression. When he dressed in the morning, carefully chosen shirts, a sophisticated watch, polished shoes, she felt a cold, sharp twist of fear that someone else might be seeing him the way she once had. Someone better. Someone who hadn't betrayed him. Someone he could become new with. The thought hollowed her out. One night she finally broke. Daniel was in the kitchen preparing a late dinner. Emily lingered in the doorway, watching him move with quiet efficiency, as if the space belonged solely to him now. The hum of the stovetop and the soft clatter of utensils blended into a strangely soothing background noise. She took a slow breath. "Daniel," she said softly. He didn't look up. Can you talk to me for a second?" He turned off the burner, set the spatula aside, and faced her with calm, patient eyes. "What is it, Emily?" She hesitated, her throat tightening. "I feel like something is happening between us." "It is," he agreed. "And I don't know how to fix it." Daniel leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms loosely. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was steady. "Not everything can be fixed," he said gently. "But I want to try. Trying doesn't undo what happened." She flinched. You know, don't you?" His expression didn't change, but something softened. "I know enough," he said quietly. Emily's eyes filled before she could stop them. "And you hate me for it?" "No," he said immediately firmly. "I don't hate you." She let out a shaky breath, some small part of her relieved, until he continued. "But I don't trust you, and I don't see a future with you the way I used to." Her chest constricted, as if the air had been punched out of her lungs. "Daniel," she whispered, reaching out instinctively. He stepped back, not dramatically, not cruelly, just a measured shift that drew a line she could no longer cross. Emily froze, her hands suspended in the air. The message was clear, and it broke something inside her. That night she cried in the shower with the water running hot enough to burn. She pressed her forehead to the tiles, her body shaking with quiet sobs, the steam blurring her reflection in the glass. She had once thought the affair was an escape, something thrilling, something validating, something she deserved. But in truth, it had been a cowardly grasp for excitement born from her own insecurities. Insecurities Daniel had never caused, insecurities she had never confronted. Now she was paying for them, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Daniel's rise continued. He returned from the leadership summit with new connections, new opportunities, and an effortless charisma that came from knowing exactly who he was. He laughed more, spoke with ease, walked with confidence. His eyes were clearer, his shoulders broader, his stance stronger. He had become everything she once wanted, and everything she no longer had access to. Emily watched every step of his ascent, with a mix of awe and agony. She saw the invitations he received from colleagues, from executives, from new acquaintances. She saw how people gravitated toward him at social events. She saw how he spoke now, how he carried himself, how he commanded a room without trying. And for the first time in her adult life, she felt small. Not because Daniel diminished her, but because her actions had diminished her own place in his world. The other man noticed her withdrawal. His texts became more frequent, more anxious. One evening he showed up outside her workplace, insisting they talk. She stood on the sidewalk, her arms crossed, her pulse racing, but not for him. "Emily," he said, breathless, "what's going on? You've been distant." "I can't do this anymore," she said flatly. Is it because of him? She looked away, shame tightening her throat. I made a mistake, she whispered. The man scoffed. You weren't saying that before. She didn't reply. Emily, he pressed, stepping closer, you said you were unhappy. You said you needed more. I was wrong. About him. No, she said quietly, about myself. The man stared at her confused, angry, hurt, but she felt nothing, not even guilt. She walked away without another word. He didn't follow. That chapter was over. But her consequences were only beginning. One evening after Daniel returned from a corporate event, he entered the house with a faint, pleasant scent clinging to his coat, floral and crisp, not hers. Emily stiffened instantly. How was the event? She asked, trying to keep her voice light. It was good. Anyone I know? No. He didn't elaborate. But she noticed the faint smudge on his jacket sleeve, a trace of lipstick, a touch of perfume, or maybe it was all in her mind. Her paranoia had grown claws of its own. Her heart pounded. Did you meet anyone new? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel paused, regarding her with calm, unreadable eyes. I met many people, he said. That's what these events are for. Her palms went cold. Daniel, are you seeing someone? He didn't answer immediately, not because he hesitated, but because he chose to weigh his words. I'm not in a relationship, he said finally. Relief flooded her too quickly. But, he continued, I'm open to possibilities I wasn't before. She felt the floor tilt under her feet. He wasn't punishing her. He was moving on. Truly, fully, confidently moving on. And she would have to watch it happen. That night Emily lay in their bed, her bed now, staring at the empty space beside her, the sheets cool and untouched. She buried her face in the pillow and inhaled the faint scent of him, a scent getting weaker with each passing day. Her tears came silently, exhaustion mixing with regret. She didn't just lose him. She lost who she had been with him. The version of herself Daniel had once loved, the version she had taken for granted, was gone. And the new version, the one shaped by secrecy and choices she couldn't undo, stood alone in the wreckage. 2 days later, she found a small envelope on the kitchen counter, her name written in Daniel's handwriting. Emily. Her heart leapt, terrified and hopeful at once. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple message. We need to talk tonight, 8 p.m. That was all. No emotion. No clues. No warmth. Just an invitation to a conversation she knew would change everything. She spent the entire day on edge, packing the house, cleaning the already spotless kitchen, fixing her makeup. Undoing it, fixing it again. She tried on 3 different outfits, settled on one, changed again. By the time the clock struck 8, her hands were shaking. Daniel entered the living room calmly, his posture straight, his expression neutral. Let's sit, he said. She did. And in that moment, heart pounding, breath tight, eyes wet, she knew. This was the turning point. Not the end. Not yet. But the moment the scales would tip, the moment the final direction of their future would form. Daniel exhaled slowly and began to speak. The living room felt smaller than usual, as though the walls had drawn closer in anticipation of the words that were about to be spoken. The lamp cast a warm pool of light between them, the air dense with unspoken truths. Daniel sat across from Emily, not beside her, not near, but opposite, a symbolic distance neither of them could ignore. He rested his hands on his knees, calm, composed, unshakably steady. He looked like someone who had rehearsed this, not the words but the resolve. Emily sat with her fingers intertwined tightly, her knuckles pale, her breath uneven. Emily, he began softly, we've been living in different worlds for months now, maybe longer. She swallowed hard. I know. And you know why, he added, not accusatory but factual. She nodded, tears already gathering. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am. He studied her expression for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you, he said. That surprised her. She blinked rapidly. You do? Yes, he said quietly. I believe you're sorry, but being sorry doesn't undo the choices. It doesn't make the past disappear. Emily looked down, ashamed. I want to explain, she began. You don't need to, he said gently. I've spent months trying to understand it. I think I do. She lifted her eyes, searching his face. And what did you understand? That you weren't looking for someone else, he said. You were looking for something in yourself, something you felt missing. She gasped softly. The truth hit like a warm yet painful breeze, a mirror held up to her soul. But looking for it the way you did, he continued, it came at a cost, and the cost was us. Tears spilled over her lashes. I know I ruined everything, she whispered. Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. You ruined what we had then, he said. But you didn't ruin me. That's the part you may not understand. You didn't break me. You freed me from the version of myself that was living small for the sake of stability. Emily shook her head, distraught. I never wanted to lose you. But you did, he said simply. Silence thickened between them. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally managed. So what happens now? Daniel hesitated, only briefly before answering. I've made a decision, he said, and I want to tell you before I take the final step. Emily's heart hammered painfully. She curled her fingers into her palms. Okay, she whispered. I'm filing for separation, Daniel said, his voice steady. Her breath hitched, but she didn't fall apart, not yet. Instead, she stared at him, wide-eyed and trembling. Separation, she repeated hollowly. Yes. Is this final? It's the beginning, he said, of the final decision, yes. She crumpled inward like a paper flower touched by flame. Daniel, please, please don't do this. I can change. I am changing. I want us to work. He shook his head gently. No, you want what you lost. That's not the same thing as wanting me. The words struck with elegant precision, a truth sharp enough to break the last illusion she clung to. Her face crumpled. I love you, she whispered desperately. His eyes softened. I loved you too, he said, very much, but you didn't choose us when you had the chance, and now I'm choosing me. A sob escaped her, raw and fragile. Is there nothing left, nothing we can salvage? Daniel looked at her for a long moment, almost lovingly, almost nostalgically. You don't need me to heal, Emily, he said softly. You need to face yourself, and I need a life that's honest. The room felt painfully silent after that. Finally, she whispered, when do you plan to file? Next week. Her breath trembled. Is there someone else? She asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Daniel considered the question thoughtfully, without anger. There isn't, he said, not yet. Not yet, she repeated, the words twisting like a knife. But I'm open, he continued gently. Open to life, open to possibility, open to people who meet me where I am. Her gut twisted. That was worse than a direct confession, a future she wouldn't be part of, a version of him she had no right to meet. Her voice came out small and fragile. And what happens to us, to me? His answer was the final, elegant stroke in the masterpiece of his quiet revenge. You get to watch, he said softly. Not because I want to hurt you, because this is what consequences feel like. You get to see the life I build, the one you walked away from before I even started building it. Emily's breath shattered in her chest. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't punishment. It was truth. A truth she had crafted herself. Daniel stood slowly, giving her a moment to absorb it. "I'll stay here for now," he said, "until the paperwork is in motion. I want this to be respectful. You deserve that, and I deserve peace." Emily's shoulders shook violently as she whispered, "I'm losing you." "You lost me months ago," he replied gently. "Tonight is just the first time you're realizing it." He walked past her then, heading toward the guest room, the room that symbolized his independence, his rebirth, his new life. Emily sat frozen on the couch, tears dripping soundlessly onto her hands. For the first time, she truly understood the shape of his revenge. It was elegant. It was quiet. It was irreversible. And it wasn't about taking anything from her. It was about giving everything back to himself. The next weeks were a blur of quiet devastation. Daniel moved through the house with steady confidence, his life continuing to expand in every direction. More invitations, more calls, more plans, his schedule filled with opportunities she wasn't part of. He laughed often now. He slept easily. He woke early. He worked out. He thrived. And Emily watched it all from the sidelines. Some evenings she tried to speak to him, small questions, soft conversations, but he responded politely, distantly, never cruel. He wasn't angry. He was done. And that hurt more than any shouting ever could have. The day he filed for separation, he left the documents on the dining table with a simple note. "For your review, I'll give you space today." Emily sat alone, staring at the papers until her vision blurred. She signed, not because she wanted to, but because he had risen so high above her actions that she no longer had the right to hold him back. Weeks later, Daniel moved into a new apartment overlooking the city, modern, bright, filled with light and potential. His friends helped him settle. His colleagues congratulated him. His life was expanding beyond anything he had imagined. One evening, he attended a professional gala. Emily saw the photos online, Daniel in a tailored suit, confident and composed, surrounded by people who looked at him the way she once had, with admiration and warmth. There was a woman beside him in one picture, smiling, elegant, touching his arm lightly. Emily closed the article, her heart tearing silently inside her chest. This was his revenge. Not a blow. Not a betrayal in return. Not bitterness. But growth. Beauty. Confidence. Joy. Without her. And that was the most powerful justice of all. Months later, when Emily passed Daniel on a busy street, he smiling, she breathless, he greeted her kindly, gently, as one greets someone from a life long past. She managed a trembling smile in return. And as he walked away, tall and confident in the golden afternoon light, she realized the final truth. She hadn't just lost him. She had lost the chance to ever again be the woman he rose beside. Daniel's revenge was complete. Beautiful. Quiet. Undeniable. A life lived well. And she would remember it forever.